Hey guys, today I'm going to be reacting to a video called Why 1/3 of France is Almost Empty. So this is a very, when I see the title, I'm like, okay, what do you mean by that? I don't know, I can't wait to find out, so let's check it out.
France is one of Europe's and one of the world's most significant countries. Home to 68 million people, France is the third most populous nation in Europe, while the French economy is the 7th largest in the world, nearly identical in size to India, a country with 20 times the population. The French language and French culture are widely known throughout the world, while the French military is the 8th best funded in the world, with bases all across the planet. France is a major global great power and has been for centuries now, which is why it's so surprising that nearly a third of the country here is basically just an empty void. And partially because of that, France has been diminishing in influence for centuries and continues to do so. For decades, people have famously identified metropolitan France in Europe as looking like a hexagon, which is why the country is so often referred to as simply l'hexagone. And due to this unique shape, it's incredibly easy to look at France through the lens of geometry when discussing regions, statistics, demography, and history. For instance, if you take a map of France and you draw a diagonal line from the port city of Le Havre on the English Channel over to straight through the center of Marseille on the Mediterranean, you'll cut the country roughly in half, and yet 60% of the French live to the east of this line, while only 40% live to the west of it, a fact that can be seen significantly more clearly when you switch out the map for a population density map. But what's far more interesting than that line are these lines. In between them is a stretch of France nearly 1,000 kilometers long and about 400 kilometers wide on average. Nearly 1/3 of France's entire territory that's about the same size as Belarus. Within this large zone, the population density of people is only about 30 persons per square kilometer, about the same as the US state of West Virginia, which has led to French demographers referring to the area as France's empty diagonal. And while in reality, that's hardly empty. Compared with the rest of France and Europe, it is a strange anomaly. Throughout the entirety of France on average, the population density is more like 120 people per square kilometer, 4 times more than the density of people living within the diagonal. To give even more perspective, neighboring Germany has a population density of 232 per square kilometer, while England has more like 270, and is therefore 9 times as densely populated as France's diagonal. France is politically divided between 18 regions that are further split up into departments and then into communes, somewhat similar to how America divides itself into states and counties. The least populated department in France is Lozère, with just a total of 76,000 inhabitants for all its nearly 5,200 square kilometers. That is comparable in size to the state of Palestine, which is home to more than 5 million people. While the entire population of Lozère could all fit comfortably into Wembley Stadium in London, with 24,000 seats left over to spare. And of course, Lozère is directly in the center of the empty diagonal, the most sparsely populated region of France, where Lozère is hardly an exception. All of these departments running through the center of France are substantially less populated than those on either side of it to the west and the east. So what's been causing this anomaly in the core of one of Europe's largest countries to be happening? Well, for one thing, it's a bit important to understand some of the prior demographic history of France, which I promise is actually fascinating. The French philosopher Auguste Comte once said that demography is destiny, and for centuries, France's demography guaranteed much of the nation's successes and influence. For most of history, France was by far the most populous country on the European continent. During the medieval period, more than 1 out of every 4 people in Europe were French, and even by the 17th century, it was still 1 out of every 5. During the French Revolutionary and Napoleonic Wars, France was still the most populous nation in Europe, and they had a higher population than even the entirety of Russia, and nearly double the population of the United Kingdom. In fact, at the time of Napoleon, France was the 4th most populous country in the entire world, lagging only behind China, India, and Japan. Such a huge population compared with all of her neighbors helps to explain France's dominance in European affairs throughout the medieval, Renaissance, and early industrial periods. But beginning in the 19th century, this demographic dominance over all of her neighbors began to shift away dramatically. The birth rate in France began to diminish in the late 18th century, far before they began to do so in every other European country, and then, during the Revolutionary and Napoleonic Wars, nearly 2 million French citizens were killed, which led to France's low population growth throughout the rest of the 19th century.
No way.
For many years in France, across the 1800s, the number of deaths in the country exceeded the number of births. And then, during the First World War, France lost 10% of its entire active male population in just 4 years. 1.3 million French were killed during the war, and along with even more births being forgone by millions of potential fathers being away at war, the French population dropped by more than 3 million. And of course, the areas that were hit the hardest by this population drop was the rural French countryside, because at the same time that these trends were happening, France was also rapidly urbanizing, and the population was becoming highly centralized around just a few key population centers. Marseille, Lille, and most importantly of all, Paris, the ever-growing city. Beginning in the 17th century, Paris began to grow larger and larger as hundreds of thousands of peasants from the French countryside continuously moved there in search of better opportunities. At the beginning of the 20th century, 40% of the French population were still living in the rural countryside. But over decades of intense societal pressures coming from millions of deaths from war, millions of men being away at war, decreasing fertility rates, and ever-increasing rates of urbanization, just 85 years later in 1985, that rate of French residing in the countryside had plummeted down to only 8%. And by then, nearly 1 out of every 5 French were living in just the Paris metropolitan area alone. But while urbanization and war certainly had massive effects on the population of the French countryside, not all areas were affected evenly. The mountainous areas of the French Alps, for example, while technically having a slightly dipping population, have a thriving tourism industry. And the majority of the French wine country, while also very rural, also continues to have a thriving industry and tourism appeal that has kept the areas decently well populated. But there are larger geographic issues at play here as well that help to explain the lack of people in the empty diagonal. When looking back at the map, you'll see that the empty diagonal spans one landlocked end of France by its border with Belgium to another landlocked end by its border with Spain. And while not every coastal area in France is highly populated, it makes sense that many of them would be, as 40% of the entire global human population lives within just 100 kilometers of a coastline. So, by drawing these lines across the French interior, you're essentially drawing a line from one area that would be statistically less populated to another area that would also be statistically less populated. In fact, if you ignore international borders entirely, the empty diagonal's population trend continues and even expands its width across the Pyrenees into Spain, a country dealing with its own demographic issues in the form of low birth rates. But there's still more to it than just not being near the coast. The areas that the diagonal cover are largely agricultural land, and throughout the world, as agriculture has become more automated and industrialized, less workers in the industry are needed. In fact, 40 years ago, about 1.6 million people in France worked in agriculture, whereas now it's roughly only 400,000, or 4 times less people. Fewer jobs and fewer opportunities to make a living inevitably mean that people eventually move on. And regardless of the country, low population density itself can become a sort of self-repeating feedback loop as well. Areas with lower population often have minimal commercial activity, and as the already small population ages, there's nothing keeping the younger generations in the area. So they leave, not just for work, but also for all the amenities that other, more thriving areas can bring. And while the French government has expressed concerns over the issue and even funded research into how to fix it, there remains no real answer. While France's geography makes this issue seem relatively unique to France, it really isn't. Demographic shifts from the countryside to the cities is a global phenomenon. And so too is the fact that more people generally tend to live closer to the coastlines, where there's just more economic activity. Therefore, it shouldn't really be too surprising after all that, wow, people actually do be living in cities. Now, if you want to start analyzing your own worldwide geographic and demographic trends, you're gonna need a pretty solid grasp on on things like geometry and statistics. But just like you might be, I've generally always been pretty terrible at math and STEM subjects, so I didn't really understand either of those things either until a few years ago when I started taking courses on Brilliant. Brilliant is an online STEM learning platform that I've been endorsing for years now because of how extremely simple and fun it is to use. For example, if you want to use just a little bit of your free time to start building up your programming skills, you should definitely check out Brilliant's course on computer science fundamentals. You're not going to have to suffer through any long lectures or big blocks of text. It'll just teach you the basics of programming through hands-on, interactive lessons and games like this one. And even if you already know everything about computer science, there are tons of other courses for you as well. You could take their course on neural networks or even quantum computing. Or you can start at the basics like I did with our courses on everyday math, geometry fundamentals, or statistics fundamentals, or plenty of others. Overall, Brilliant has dozens of courses that cover a wide variety of fascinating and cutting-edge STEM subjects, so the odds are good that there's something there for you. It's a great way to get a little smarter every single day, and best of all, you can join their community of 8 million other learners with 20% off of an annual subscription by being one of the first 200 people to click this button that's here on screen right now, or by heading over to brilliant.org/real-life-lore using the link that's down below in the description. And, as always, thank you so much for watching.
Okay, so this was very think of it like that. It's like it's funny that you're seeing like the facts, but they're like no, they're explaining it like they're explaining why it is, and then they say like it's not and specifically like a French thing. And it's true. It's like, yes, of course that there a lot of countries do suffer from this, but if you look at it like that, it's quite alarming. It's like, oh my God. But yeah, once he explains that, it's like, it's true. Like, again, it's normal for people that want to live, like a lot of people. And I think, again, like it's mostly, I can't even think of like, I think like 90% of countries do have that of like the population is usually concentrated in a few areas. And like he said, again, it's like in the metropolis, in the big cities. And I know that it's usually, I don't really understand like much of the explanation of it all. But I do know that usually people and usually tend to live in cities that are near, like, again, coastlines or bodies of water. I think it's just like the way things are made from, I don't know, ancient history, like the usually like the cities were founded that way. And I think it's just a shift that has remained in time. Usually, obviously, cities are quite old. And even though they change, they expand, usually the same cities, usually in countries that are even like newer countries, like the cities have been there since the creation of said town or said country, even if that country was named other thing, it was named something else. Again, like the cities themselves, I think they remain, and obviously like the cities are super old. So it is normal, like you're not gonna like shift the capital and you're gonna shift the population from one place to another. It happens, but I think it's quite uncommon. Because again, people are gonna like, they've been living there for centuries and it's not gonna change. It's unlikely to change. But it's like, okay, so he explains it all and it's like, okay, I get it. I get like the logic behind it all. That it's like, yes, people usually, again, they tend to live near coasts of water, near coastlines or bodies of water, which again makes sense. It's not just a French thing. It's all over the world problem. But I think it's okay. I don't know why, but I'm thinking, again, like in the USA, it's because it's like a very common and obviously a pretty big country. I think they also have the same problem. I don't know if it's like 1/3 of the USA is almost empty. I don't know if that's actually the case, but looking at it like that, the equivalent is, I think, like the sort of like the Midwest of the USA. It's quite empty as well. And it's the same area. Again, it's like the Midwest. It's just empty. Obviously there are states, there are cities, but usually people tend to live in the big cities. They tend to live in bigger states. And they are actually, again, near coastlines. Like, you know, you have in the East Coast, you have New York, which obviously is home to like so many people. In the East Coast, you have LA, well, California. There's like so many people that live there as well. So and it's also a coastline. So it is like, you know what? There's a point. I don't really know, like in places like there are islands like in Great Britain. I don't really like, I think London is near south. Well, it's like they actually have a river. Like, again, it's like, it's a common thing. Like, usually in cities, like, there's gotta be like some sort of river and they're near water and stuff. And usually, like, the mid part of a country, usually, like, it's quite empty. It's true. Like, it makes sense. Not always, but again, like, he explains it very well. And it's like, yes, I think it's just because people tend to, like, live and they tend to move, like, into cities. And those big cities happen to be like near coastlines because, well, that's the way it is. That's the way it has been for centuries. But I do think it's also like the problem. I think it's more of like we can do anything about that. But again, it's the what can we do about this? And also, like, is it actually a problem? I have like two like questions about this because it's like I get the decreasing population is a problem. I think most countries I know that have, well, a lot of countries do have the problem of like people are having less kids, and if they're having less kids, you know, the population is just like filled with older people. And it's a worry that, you know, people have because like no one lives here, and when old people die, then, you know, no one's gonna be living here, and there's no productive, you know, no one actually works in the country, and it's gonna be, you know, like you need active and younger people that actually like work there in order to like activate the economy. So of course it's a worrisome that it's just older people, and, you know, they're not having children, and so like who's gonna actually activate the economy. So on one hand, I know that a lot of countries do have that problem, I think, especially in Europe, but I think there are some places in Asia that also have it. And it's just like, again, it's a worldwide problem. Countries have tried, like every country tries to like do their own thing and tries to maybe like help and maybe encourage people that, hey, please come here. When people, I think immigrants like tend to, again, it's a natural thing. Even immigrants, even it's just internal migration inside the country or external migration from other countries. Obviously, you don't want to like when people move, like they want better opportunities. Usually people don't really move if they're going to have like a poor quality of life. They're just like, no, I'll stay where I am. But it's like, so that's the case, and they're obviously going to move when to the places that have jobs and they have industry. So of course they're going to move to the big cities. So, like, those countries are like, please don't move to the big cities. Please, like, come to these little towns that are, you know, practically uninhabited, because we need younger people that actually work here. But again, it's like you said, it's a self-fulfilling prophecy, because younger people, like, if there's a town that doesn't really, like, it's just there, like, there's no amenities, like, there's nothing to do there. Either for like jobs, there are no like cool things to do. Like it's just like a town that a ghost town maybe, or it's just very focused, for instance, in like agriculture. That also it's an industry that is diminishing because a lot of the processes are automated these days, so they don't really need that much workers in that area. So of course people are going to move. So what happens, like the fields and those towns that are near the fields are, you know, inhabited. So again, people don't want to move there because obviously why would you? Like there's no life there. There's no job opportunities, and there's no like, you know, your lifestyle's not going to be like what you're used to, or it's not going to be what you expect. So you're going to move to a big city. Of course, that's just like, that's the way it is. And I know that, again, some places, I know Spain also has this problem, and I know maybe it's the thing about like this part of the region, like geographically, because again, they also mentioned Spain, and obviously France and Spain share a border. So it is like, well, you know what, maybe it's the thing about like that area of the world that has that problem, where like a lot of like towns are just filled with old people and younger people are just moving, and it's just like ghost towns, and they do have that problem. I know the government is trying to sort of like do they encourage people to move there, but it really does take, I don't know how successful it has been or how successful it will be, because it needs a long-term investment of like really do invest. You really need to, again, like create programs and stuff that actually work long-term, and or for people to actually want to move there. And again, it's not just like a short-term situation. No, you actually need, again, actual programs, and activate those towns again, and make it popular for people to actually want to move there. Because again, it's not just like, hey, we encourage you to move here. Like, it's great. We swear. It's like, no, you actually need to put in some effort, and the government obviously needs to like work on some sort of plan, and it's a long-term plan in order to like rehab it, like these towns. So I don't know how, like, if France also has them, or do they have plans for it? Because I know it's quite hard. Like, I'm not an expert on this, but I do know that, you know, it's a hard conundrum. Like, yes, it is. But at the same time, I'm wondering, like, is it really that bad that people don't really live there? Because France is it's a huge country, and it has so many like population density. Like, there's millions of people that live there. I think it was like 60 people, which again, it's like they're all concentrated in different cities. It's just like smaller cities. But, you know, they're not like filled in the whole country. But it's like, yes, but I think that's how it works. Not just in France, in every single place in the world, every city, every country in the world works like that. Like, it's not just like, it's not evenly populated. It's just like smaller, like everything's populated in like the city here and in the city here and the city here. But it's not just like, oh no, the country is just like evenly populated. I think that only happens, if it happens, I think it happens in like fewer countries in general. So it is like, is it really that bad? Like, would it be that bad? It's like, well, yeah, it's empty, but like, who cares? I don't know. On one hand, I'm like, yes, it's good that they're trying to like fix the problem, but at the same time, I'm like, is it really that bad? I think maybe it's just like a question of, if that many people, like for instance Paris, because I'm putting Paris obviously is like this huge city, is the capital, and I'm guessing like it's obviously the most populated city in France. So maybe it's just like a problem of like Paris is very crowded, and there's like a lot of people that actually live here. And it's becoming a problem, maybe like in the infrastructure, maybe like the traffic, it's terrible, or maybe like the subway, like the metro, it's not capable of handling that many millions of people, you know, living their lives. Maybe it's a thing about that. You know, I think that would be like my number one concern if I worked in the French government. Like, is it a problem? But is it a problem because, again, it's the infrastructure that's not working, and we can't really handle the capacity of like, I don't know, 30 millions of people like living here, or in Lyon, or in Marseille, I don't know, like in these bigger cities. That's I think what would be my actual question, because otherwise it would be like, well, you know, like, why fix it if it's not broken? People will say, well, but it's broken, like it's empty. But it's like, well, I don't know. I think that cities and countries are constantly like evolving. So it is like, well, yeah, people are shifting away from agriculture, and they're shifting away from like living in these areas. And is it really that bad? I don't know, because again, industries work in different like ways, and if there are other industries that can be exploited and people can work there in maybe other cities, then is it really that bad that they're moving? I don't know. I think it's a complicated subject that it can be up to like a lot of debate actually. And I think there are going to be like, I don't know. Okay, it's a thing about like there's so many like elements that you can discuss about this situation that it's like, I don't know, like we can talk about this for hours, and I think it's quite interesting of a subject, because again, everyone's kind of have like their own perspective, their own opinion, and it can be like, I don't know, again, like I want to hear like, why is it that bad, you know? Because I'd be like, you know what, let's just leave it as it is. I don't know. Or maybe again, and if it's a question about like the infrastructure cannot handle the capacity of like those millions of people, then well, yeah, maybe work, like I said, and like maybe reintroducing like certain towns and reactivating the economy in those certain towns to make it feasible and make it like popular and attractive for people to move there, especially like younger people. But I have to say something that, again, it's just like the natural order of things, but I have to say, I don't know how it is in other countries, or maybe it is, but I don't know. I've never seen like the statistics. It's crazy to think like there was at some point in history, there were like so many French people, like in not just in Europe, but like in the world, which is crazy, because I know that obviously France is one of the most like populated and most famous countries like in the world. I think everyone knows, like whatever it is that you are in the world, I think you probably know some French people, and it's kind of crazy to think like they're having a problem now because it's like, oh my god, like French people are they're not like, oh no, they're gone. Like, no, they're not gone. They're not like they're not diminishing as a population, but they have diminished throughout the years, which I think is crazy. Like, obviously not just like in 5 years, 10 years. This is like long term, like in the past like 200 years. But it's crazy that in the Middle Ages, like everyone was French. It's like one in every like 5 people was French. It's like, okay, so everyone's French, great. But it's crazy again to think of like, wow, even with that, again, it's like, it's a pretty, like, still these days, you can find French people everywhere. So it is kind of funny if you think about it like this and see that like the actual statistics to see how it has diminished throughout the years, and it's crazy. And to think of it like it was just because of wars, it's like, oh my god, just because of wars. It was like the Napoleonic Wars, then I think it was the Revolution, and then it's like the World War I, and it's like, oh my god, throughout like, I don't know, so many wars and conflicts, and like they basically killed their whole population. I mean, it's unfortunate. Obviously, no one wants to like kill them on purpose, but a lot of like men died, and because obviously men were the ones that, well, everyone died, but usually, obviously, in war, men are the main casualty. And it's like, yes, of course they die, so it's potential fathers, so people are not having kids, and obviously, you know, it's a natural order of things. So it's crazy to think that, oh my god, it's just because of the wars in the last, I don't know, 200 years, 250 years, that the population has diminished to the point of like, well, yes, you still got a lot of French people, but, you know, they have diminished quite a bit, especially compared to like the Middle Ages. It's crazy. Like, they basically like, inadvertently, and again, it's just, it's the consequences of things that happen, and they basically like killed so many people. Well, not they killed. Let's just say, well, people were killed in not an active way, but it's crazy to think about it like that. Like, oh my god, they killed like the 2 million people were killed. It's crazy, and it's like, okay, if you think about it like that, it's like a little mind blowing to think that the whole population, how many potential lives like were wasted because they were killed. It's kind of like, that's actually quite sad, incredibly sad. And I don't know how to feel about that, because again, if you like reflect on it a little bit, it's like, okay, this is making me quite depressed to think of like how many people have died, and to the point where it's actually like, wow, you should see that. But imagine if there hadn't been any wars, like, and again, like so many French people around these days, even if they haven't been wars, and those like 2 or 3 million people that actually have lived, imagine how many French people there would be like these days. Everyone would be French, and they do mention that, like, it's crazy to think like they were actually like this global superpower, and to this point, like during this point in time, I think France is still one of the most like important countries in the world. So it is like, wow, it tells you like a lot of the power that they had and that they still have these days. And I think it's just, again, by sheer number of people, you know, there's powers in numbers. I think France really does show us that. But this was incredibly an interesting subject that I think you can really do discuss it. And I think it's going to be a lot of different perspectives. And it was incredibly interesting. That was it for today. And I'll see you next time. Bye.